Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Expert podcast and to a very special interview with resilience and high pressure performance expert, Dr. Brian Hite. Many of us face some high pressure moments as part of our academic journey. I'm thinking those big exams, interviews, assignment deadlines, and so on. Brian is a coach, speaker, and author specialising in high stakes performance. He has over 30 years experience as a professional stuntman with over 100 film and TV credits to his name. He also holds a PhD in organisational psychology and a master's in sports psychology. He's currently a faculty member at Grand Canyon University and a master resilience trainer for the US Army. Brian, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Let me just clear up one thing. I'm not a master resilience trainer for the US Army anymore. I was for 10 years.
Gotcha.
That stopped about 2.5 years ago, I guess. I don't know. It's been a minute.
Well, thank you for the clarification. A heck of a CV, nonetheless. And just indulge us before we get down to business. I'm sure listeners would love to just have a little bit of colour on the stunt stuff because that sounds really exciting.
Yeah, sure. I mean, whatever you want to talk about, we can hit stunts first if you'd like. It was interesting the way that you introduced it, though, because I'm looking forward to getting into it. You're talking about high pressure moments, and you just said it just comes off your tongue very easily, as it does most people, because that's how people think about pressure itself and even high stakes situations. There's a reason why I say high stakes, why I use that particular term. So we can get into that later, but I just wanted to point out just right from the gate, like you mentioned high pressure moments, and I love it. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. But to stunts first, what would you like to know?
Oh, just give us 30 seconds, a little bit of colour. What sort of work was it? Any kind of things we'd have heard of? You just the stuff.
Yeah, I was about halfway through college when I went and I saw a live stunt show at a theme park. It was called Six Flags, and I was hooked. I was amazed. I'd been struggling to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, and once I saw that show, that was it. That's what I wanted to do. I mean, we weren't 2 minutes into the show before this huge explosion happened and motorcycles came jumping out, and I was mesmerized. So I went backstage and I asked the people, how do you get this job? And they said, well, you need to know how to do fights, high falls, and motorcycles. So I linked up with one of the people from the show. He taught me fights and high falls. I bought a dirt bike. I learned how to ride it well enough to get hired, and then got a lot better once I did the show. And then I did the show the following summer. And again, just fell in love. It was the best summer of my life. Did the show again the summer after that, and but I did end up dropping out of college. So I did the show for one summer, and that was the summer after my junior year of college. I had one more year of college to go. But because I decided that stunts was what I wanted to do, I was no longer struggling. I was no longer trying to figure out what I wanted to be. College didn't matter anymore. And at least to me, I mean, that was how my mind was working at the moment. And I was failing everything, literally all my classes. So I dropped out with one semester to go, did the show one more summer, moved out to Los Angeles and started doing the show out there too. There was a Six Flags in Los Angeles that I was able to do the show in. And that got me started, working in the film and TV world. I met some of those people. And it just snowballed from there. I worked on one show, one gets you two gets you four, and next thing you know, that's what I'm doing for a job. So since then, it's been 30 years ago. I've worked on a lot of different things. If people are curious, I'd suggest just look my name up in IMDb, the International Movie Database. I think that is imdb.com, and you'll see some stuff. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. I don't know. At the moment, there's a brand new TV show called 911 Nashville that is shooting in my hometown, Nashville, Tennessee, which is where I live. But that's a new show that I'm doubling Chris O'Donnell on, and so that's been a fun job. So that's the stunts.
Amazing. And thank you for bringing in a little bit of your sort of academic background as a student as well. I'd love to circle back on that a little bit later in the conversation. So I think that'll be really interesting. So you mentioned that you specialise in teaching high stakes performance. So tell us a little bit about what that means to you.
Yeah, high stakes performance to me is performance in any situation where there's a big difference between the consequences of success and the consequences of failure. When there's a big gap between what happens when you win and what happens when you lose, what happens when you succeed, what happens when you fail, that's what I call a high stakes situation. And even within that definition, there's still a lot of subjectivity, in the sense that what matters to you, what you think is important, might be very different from what matters to me. So you and I could find ourselves in the exact same situation. I would think of it as a high stakes situation. You would not. That's entirely possible. So there still is some subjectivity. There's no way to just objectively label an event as high stakes. But I think it's way better than calling it high pressure or high stress, because for sure situations aren't that. And what I mean by that is, again, going back to the two of us, you and I could find ourselves in the exact same situation. One of us might experience pressure and the other one may not. One of us might experience stress and the other one may not. And there are differences between pressure and stress. They're not the same thing. So within the limits of pressure and stress, I think that talking about situations in terms of those really makes no sense. But But with high stakes, I think it's still important to remember that even those, we create the stakes. And that's important too, because one of the things that we can do to lower the likelihood of pressure and stress being encountered is to lower the stakes of the situation. And although we may not be able to change the circumstances of the situation, we can absolutely adjust our perceptions of the situation, what we choose to focus on, what we choose to prioritize, how we choose to see the circumstance that we're in. And just that switch alone can change the stakes and can adjust our levels of pressure and stress that we experience.
That's a really interesting insight. Yeah, I'd love to ask you more about that in a moment. So you've got a background in psychology and academia. From an academic or research perspective, I'm just curious, what do we kind of know about how kind of high stakes can impact us? Anything it does to kind of how our brain works, our ability to think clearly. Kind of what do we know from the research?
Yeah, well, the theory that I lean on in terms of stress is something called the transactional model of stress. And essentially what it says, this is by Lazarus and Folkman. It's been around for a long time. But essentially what it says is that when we are in a situation, we do what's called a primary appraisal. And that's simply asking the question, is this a threat? Is there a potential threat? Might I be harmed in some kind of way in this situation? And if the answer is yes, then we move to a secondary appraisal. And the secondary appraisal is asking the question, do I have the resources necessary to deal with this threat effectively? And if the answer is no, that's where stress happens. So stress is experienced when we perceive a situation as a potential threat and we don't believe we have what it takes to deal with that threat effectively. So I think that that's useful information for people, because that means that if we're experiencing stress, debilitating levels of stress, but I would argue any stress in a performance situation where you want to perform, and we can get into that comment more if you want to, but we can tackle stress in two different ways. One is, let's change the perception of the situation being a threat, and the other is, if we can't change the perception of the situation being a threat, then we can change the resources that we have available. We can bring our attention to some more effective resources. We can take steps to augment resources we have, maybe some weaknesses that we have, can lean more heavily on some of our strengths, but we can tackle stress in those ways. And what I mean in terms of the threat situation of if we can't say that there isn't a threat, then we can go to the resources, is this. One of the things that I've really had to think a lot about is that a lot of the common advice around these situations where people experience stress is, well, just don't think of it as a threat. Think of it as a challenge. Think of it as an opportunity. Look at it as a chance to whatever, fill in the blank. And there's value in that for sure. And that switch in perspective absolutely can adjust the stakes and the way that we see the situation, and can help us lean in rather than avoid these situations that are really important to us. However, I personally myself, I've been in quite a few situations where if I did it wrong, I wasn't going to go home, at least not in the same condition I showed up, or somebody I was working with might not go home. So there's no way to talk myself out of the fact that it's a threat. And the same thing with police officers or firefighters. You know, when there are bullets flying, it's a threat. You can't rainbow and unicorn your way out of it. It just is. And that's okay, because we can still tackle stress and create conditions for ourselves to perform to our potential through that secondary appraisal. All right, but what resources do I have? Yes, it's a threat. Something bad might happen. I might die. I might have whatever. This is very real. That's just reality as we're experiencing it right now. Let's acknowledge that. And I have the resources to deal with it. I have the skills. I have the training. I have the learning that's necessary. You know, I mean, part of the topic of this podcast is exams. Well, you know what? I've studied for the test. I've looked through my notes. I've asked myself and answered hard questions about the material. You know, I have people I can go to. I have a professor or teacher that I can go to ask some questions to get clarification. I have resources that I can use in this situation. I've slept well. I've eaten well. I'm not hungry. I have the resources to do well in this situation. So is it a threat? If I screw this test up, might I not get into a school that I really want, or might my future be in jeopardy, or might I lose a job or something? Yes, if that's the reality, that's the reality. Is that a threat? You can certainly call it that. That would be legitimate. All right. But it doesn't change the situation. So let's look at what resources we have. And if you can acknowledge the resources, if you can recognize the resources that you can bring to bear to help create conditions for the best performance possible, then that will alleviate the stress. So we don't just have to talk ourselves out of something being a threat. If we focus on the resources, we can eliminate stress as well.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about kind of in terms of how you can prepare for that exam. I think it's both how you prepare and then also recognizing that you have done that and bringing that to the forefront of your mind. So it's both the act of doing the prep and then also having that on your mind and that kind of helping alleviate some of that stress. Is that right?
I mean, the preparation for sure, but also even in the moment. So what resources do you have to bear in the moment? Well, I'm really good at recognizing which problems are easy and which ones aren't, which ones I need to skip and which ones I need to come back to. I'm not quite as good at organizing essays. So if the question involves writing of some sort, I know I need a little bit of extra time for that. Those are resources. That knowledge, that self-awareness, that's a resource that we have. And we can leverage it in the moment. So it isn't necessarily about just preparation. It's also in the moment. And also, so while you're taking a test, maybe you recognize that the tension starts to get higher, the arousal levels, your pumped upness starts to get a little bit too high, muscle tension starts to get a little bit too much, and you recognize that. Well, in the moment, if you have as one of your resources the ability to separate from the situation, to step back mentally, to physically relax your muscles, to change your breathing, take control of your body in that moment. Those are resources too, and they can be used in the moment. So it isn't just about preparation. There are also resources we can leverage while performing that are helpful as well.
Yeah. So, okay, let's say we hit a question in the exam. It's a tough question for us, or maybe, we ran out of runway on our prep time and, God forbid, we missed it out from our prep entirely. And so we have that sense of panic rising up. Step by step, what do I do in that moment?
Well, it would depend on the type of question, because what my answer would be is, well, what do you need to do? I mean, what are the task relevant things that would be helpful? And if it's skip the question, then it's skip the question. I mean, sometimes it's just it's cut your losses, and that's how it is.
So let's say I had this in one of my final exams at university. I say it's 3 hours, 3 essays, 1 hour per essay. So it's a third of the exam.
Okay, well, it doesn't have to be. I mean, it's certainly possible that one of the essays is very easy and will flow very quickly and you get it done in 20 minutes. It's possible that one of the other ones is more challenging and maybe it lasts a minute. You got 3 hours and there are 3 essays. It doesn't have to be an hour per essay unless it is. I mean, some of the tests are timed and they say, no, you have 1 hour. And at the end of that, whatever you've gotten written is what you've gotten written. But if it's the way you described it, 3 essays in 3 hours, then think of it as 3 essays in 3 hours. And for some people, it might be challenging to do this. If you hit a snag in one essay, switch to another one. I mean, there are some other I have no idea. This is just coming to my mind right now. I'm talking, I've never tried this. I have no idea if it's a good idea. There might be people who are holding their ears or would scream at the loud and like, don't do this. But essays happen in sections. There are different sections of essays. So you have an introduction, you've got some evidence, there are different sections. Might be useful to write the first section of each essay. And then, go back. So you write the first section of the one, go to the other one, and then you come back. For some people, they might find that helpful to not be so locked into one, or especially if you run into a snag. Like, I don't know exactly how I'm going to tie together this and that. All right, well, let's not worry about it. Let's go over here to this other one. Because disengaging our minds from one task and engaging in another one fully, for whatever reason, things happen in our brain. And when we go back to that first task, sometimes the answers are just waiting for us. And it's a really weird experience, but it's a very cool one when it happens. So give your brain the opportunity to do that, to just process things in the background while you're working on something else. Come back and see if anything's changed. If it has, great, you move forward. If it hasn't, well, you're no worse off than you were before. You were stuck before, you're stuck now. So, But as far as the stress and pressure of the situation, it would be keeping your mind focused on the task. That's the biggest thing. Because as soon as you start letting your mind wander to the clock or to the consequences of not getting things done in a certain amount of time, that's where attention is squandered. That's where effort is wasted. That's where energy is wasted. Because no amount of thinking about time or imagining future consequences, and that's an intentionally chosen word, imagining. We're imagining future consequences. We don't know the future. We're not sure of what exactly is going to happen if we screw this up. I have a great story on that with 911 Nashville on a stunt perspective, but we don't know. It's imaginary, and any time spent on that is wasted time. Time needs to be spent on task-relevant activities, whatever they might be.
So I was apologising when we joined the call, Brian. I was just running a couple of minutes late, and the reason for that was I was plugging all my tech in, and then for the life of me I couldn't find where I'd put my microphone cable, and so my office is a mess of cables around me. I was trying to find this cable, and I was feeling that sense of high state. I was feeling some pressure, I was feeling some stress, because it means a lot to me to show up for my guests, for my audience, and do what we do here on the show. There's the classic thing. It was already half plugged into my laptop, and the other end was just dangling off the deck. Like, it was just there. It was where it needed to be already. But I can see that. Like, I was blind. Like, if I'd been calm, I'm sure I would have noticed that. But I was almost like blinded to that because of the kind of mental states. Like, are there any tools I could have used in that moment? Is there like a pausing for a mindful breath? Is there a breathing thing? Is there like a place in your mind you go to?
What you described is very similar to something I did with the Army. So let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
So I was. This is when I had just started working with the military, and one of the things that they do prior to deployment, and this is back when they were deploying to Iraq fairly frequently, is they went to the National Training Center, which is like the World Cup training event for the Army. Like, you have to go there and you have to do well in order for the Army to say, yes, you're good, you can go overseas, you can deploy. And I deployed with a unit, or I went to the National Training Center with a unit that I was working with. And one of the things that they did was, it was called MOUT training, M-O-U-T, Military Operations in Urban Terrain, clearing buildings. Now, this was a unit of combat engineers. Combat engineers, their job is usually route clearance, meaning they'll go very slowly down a certain route looking for explosive devices, different things that might cause problems for the convoys going through. They either defuse, get rid of those explosive devices in whatever way, and then the convoys can travel more safely. That's the job of a combat engineer. It's not clearing buildings, but back in that particular war, Everybody was clearing buildings. It didn't matter what your job was. There were just a lot of buildings to clear, so everybody did it. So that was part of the training at the National Training Center. Well, these guys, because that wasn't their primary mission and they didn't spend a whole lot of time practicing, they were really bad at it. And they went in and it was like a circus. I mean, they were so bad. I didn't even know much about building clearing at the time, and I could tell that they were bad at it. I mean, they were rushing through stuff. There was communication was nil. They were stumbling over things. They were missing the intelligence. They were supposed to clear the room and then look for, I don't know what, computers or different types of intelligence things to see that. They didn't see any of it. Just like you said, you didn't see the cord. It was right in front of your face. They didn't see a computer, literally right in front of them. And that was part of what they did. So they finished the 4 buildings or whatever it was, and the person in charge pulled them together and said, "Look, you guys, you guys got to calm down, and you need to take a tactical pause before you go into each room." And I thought that was excellent advice. But what he didn't do was tell them how to calm down or what to do during the tactical pause that might be helpful. But we had trained that. I had gone through some things with them. So I said, remember when we talked about breathing? Remember when we talked about cue words? Remember when we talked about routines? This is the stuff you can use. And so they developed their own routine that incorporated cue words and breathing. They would stack on a door, and then they'd say, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That was their cue word that kind of reminded them to just stay focused, stay smooth, stay controlled. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Ready, big breath. Go. And that's what they did before every room. They would clear the room, and then they'd do what they need to do. They'd stack on the next door. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Ready? Go. And each time, what it was doing was resetting them mentally and physically. There's a right physical place in terms of energy activation that we need to be in order to perform well. It doesn't matter what the task is, whether it's a test or whether it's clearing buildings. There's a right physical state for us. And there's a right mental state for us. And they work together, the physical and the mental. In other words, when we're in, panic physical mode, where muscles are all tense, heart's racing, breathing's going crazy, well, the mind is it's racing and going crazy as well, and the attention's focused. Same thing mentally, when we get our minds caught around some of these consequences. Oh my God, well, if this happens, then this is going to happen, then that's going to happen. The next thing you know, I'm going to be homeless under a bridge. And that's just happening in our minds, but it will be felt in our bodies as well. So taking control of both simultaneously is very helpful. What's a mental thing that you can do to ground yourself, to anchor yourself in the moment? What is a physical thing that you can do to ensure that your energy activation levels are in that ideal place for whatever task you're doing? And it varies from task to task. It will be different for a test versus clearing a building, from, getting hit by a car to having a conversation with a kid. It varies. So that's the story. So what they did is they went through the whole thing again, and they applied that. It was slow as smooth, smooth as fast. Ready? Go. And it was I've seen a lot of improvement from time 1 to time 2 with different things. You would expect some improvement, and when you provide guidance, you would expect even more improvement. These guys, they went from like a 2 to an 8 in terms of, on a scale of 1 to 10. They were good the next time around. They cleared the buildings efficiently. They found the intelligence material that they were supposed to. Communication got way, way better. They were talking to each other, and they came out much less tired than they did the first time. They weren't as winded. They weren't as exhausted after clearing the buildings. So I don't know if that story helps in terms of what you're talking about, but that's an example of how we can combine a mental and physical strategy in order to create conditions in this moment for what's important.
So the deep breath's going to work for everybody, isn't it? How do you kind of develop that association for the cue word you were talking about? Like, how do you train in a calm condition associating the?
Well, you just have to ask yourself, what do you want? I mean, what did you want? In their case, they were hectic. They were all over the place, and they were trying to be fast. But by trying to be fast, they were actually being slow. So they had to remind themselves of something that would help ground them and get them into the right place. So we just have to ask ourselves, well, what's your challenge, and what do you want? What does right look like? And figure out something that works for you that reminds you of that in the moment. And then it becomes a question of becoming aware of the challenge once it starts to arise as quickly as possible. So developing self-awareness is critical. And then accepting reality for what it is. We've talked about that a little bit. Look, right now I'm feeling tense. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling worried. I'm feeling scared. Whatever it is, that's what it is. I don't need to try to talk myself out of it. I just need to acknowledge this is what it is. And then I can make some changes. I can regulate. I can, all right, well, so I know that when I feel scared, when I feel worried, when I feel tense, these are some things that I can do. These are some of the resources that I have available that I can lean on. Physical resources, mental resources, emotional resources, social resources. We can draw on all of those to help us in those moments. So it starts with self-awareness, becoming aware of what's happening and staying aware of it as much as possible, accepting reality, and then making the changes using the resources we have at our disposal.
Nice. Just one other little detail to pick up on this. It's such great advice, Brian. Thank you. You mentioned routine along with cue words and breathing. And one of the things I've long taught for exam strategy is having checklists or almost routines, I guess. So whether you're with the sort of things you run through when you sit down at your exam desk, maybe things you run through in response to a specific kind of question. I'm going to do this. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about with routine?
Yeah, routines take different forms at different times. We developed pretty early on in my career with the military a 4-phased approach to performance. So one of the things that we found was lacking in the mental skills training and application across the board, just not with the military, but just in general, was the idea of, okay, we've got the skills, we understand goal setting and cue words and routines and mental imagery, visualization, etc. But when do you use them? Like, when's the right time to put these things into practice? And are there different ways to use them at different times of performances? So we divided performances up into a before, a right before, a during, and an after. And the before, during, and after has been talked about in the literature before, but we added a right before. And that really stemmed from my work as a stuntman. When I show up on set, that's a before. So it's before things are happening. I put on wardrobe. I go to hair and makeup. Maybe I get a little food. We go to rehearsal. I see what I'm going to do. We figure out what the thing's going to be, and then we just kind of hang out until it's time to do it. So that's before. Now, I can't stay in my performance state physically and mentally that I'll need to be in when I actually do the stunt. Let's say it's a stair fall. So we're going to do a little fight and get punched and fall down some stairs. There's a mental and physical state that I need to be in prior to the stair fall in order to do it well. But I can't stay in that state for, 5, 6, sometimes 10, 12 hours before the thing actually occurs. So the before is important. So what do you do before? What do you do to maintain the skills, to rehearse things, to stay physically, mentally, emotionally, and socially engaged and prepared? And then there's the right before. So this is where performance is imminent. So in terms of a test, maybe the before starts the day before. Maybe it's the day of, the morning of. I always, when I've talked to people about tests, I've started it the day before, because eating, sleeping, even exercising, stretching, these are things that if you do the day before can be beneficial the next day. So I always start it then. But whatever it is, then there comes a time when you walk in the door. Like it's imminent. You're not taking the test yet, but it's coming, and it's coming really quick. So how do you shift from the physical and mental state that exists in the before to the physical and mental state you need for the performance? That's the right before piece. So in that right before, that's when the transition happens. That's when the rest of the world disappears and we only focus on task relevant things, preparing ourselves in this moment for what we are about to do. And so what strategies do we use? And we develop the strategies to make that transition happen. And then phase 3 is the performance. This is when, okay, go. Time starts now. Whatever the words are that get used, and action, whatever they are, but it's all happening right now. And that's the performance. So again, in the performance, what skills can you use to get your attention where it needs to be, keep it there, and regain it once you are inevitably distracted? Because we're human beings, that happens. So we have those strategies. How do we stay tuned in to our physical state and monitor that energy activation level? And then the performance is over. It ends, we're done. Some people just, that's it, but it can't be it. There has to be another phase, the phase 4, which is the after phase. What do we do afterward? And there are 2 things I focus on in that phase. One is recovery, because you've just expended energy, mental energy, physical energy. Again, it's hard to distinguish between the 2, and anybody who's taken a test will understands what I'm talking about. Your brain feels tired, but so does your body. But it's over. So how do we recover that energy? But the second part is, how do we learn from this experience so that the next time that we perform this task, and it may be immediate. So for example, you can do this within tests. So if tests have sections, you can in the performance mode, you're in phase 3 for the test itself, and time's up. Okay, great. So now we move back to phase 2 or even phase 1, because you'll get a little break. Whatever that break is, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, could just be 30 seconds, whatever it is. But you can take that time and you can cycle through. All right, so I'm in the before. How do I prepare? Let me just visualize what's coming. New section. All right, let me transition. Make sure I check in. Slow, smooth is fast. Checking in with that physical state, that mental state. Getting myself ready. All right, and time for the section 2, go. Now we're in performance again. So we can do it within and immediate, but most performances we engage in at one point in time, we will engage in again later. It might be a month later, might be a year later, but we're going to do it again. So how do we learn from the experience we just had? So how and when does that happen? So I encourage people to finish the task, take a few minutes, recover, just be with what is. Recognize, again, that awareness. Recognize how you're feeling, what you're thinking, what's going on. Don't try to learn, don't try to change, don't try to, don't get into the second part too fast. So with athletes, for example, I if you're going to debrief this with your coach and you're going to go back and you're going to figure out, okay, well, what worked, what didn't, don't do that immediately upon the end. Like, just have a second to sit and figure out what you're feeling and what you experienced. Then have the conversation after you've calmed down, because then you're going to be mentally in a place where you can process the information more effectively and take away the lessons probably more thoroughly. And so those are the 4 phases. Phase 1, beginning, just preparation, getting your mind kind of where it needs to be, making sure you're set up physically, mentally, emotionally, and socially. Right before, transitioning from that walking around state to that performance state. During, again, whatever needs to be done in order for you to keep your mind and body where they need to be on task relevant things so that you are performing to your potential. And then afterward, how do you recover energy? How do you learn? That's the 4-phase approach.
Amazing. And really helpful to think through that. Thank you. I'm conscious our time is coming towards an end, Brian, and you've been very generous with your thoughts and your time today. So thank you on behalf of everybody listening. It's been really, really fascinating. I just wonder, as we bring this towards a close, if you had someone in your life, perhaps a younger relative, for example, who you love and care about, they're facing an exam next week and they're nervous about it. Is there a little practical tool or something you'd give them? Perhaps we've already touched on it, or perhaps there's something, just a little thought that you throw.
Yeah, well, I would 4 things. They're not quick, but I'll try to go through them as quickly as I can. Yeah. One, we've already talked about it, so we can go. Is stress? Is it a threat? Be honest about that. Is it a threat? And like, what truly could bad happen to you? You're not going to die because of a bad, grade or whatever the score is. Usually the one, it's not a be all end all kind of a situation. It's one grade of many, depending on what the exam is and how it is. Often we can retake things. So really, truly, is it a threat? Is that the right way to think about it? Maybe not. But if so, and I'm not going to try to talk you out of it, 'cause sometimes maybe it is, well, you've still got some resources. So identify what your resources are that you bring. What are your strengths that you already have? What are some weaknesses that maybe you have time to augment a little bit? And how can you apply those resources? And then, speaking of the application of those resources, maybe think in terms of those 4 phases: before, right before, during, and after. What resources can you leverage in each of those situations that can help you? Like I said, in the before, making sure you get enough sleep, that you have whatever things packed the morning of already the night before, that you've eaten well. So the 4 phases, when are you going to operate those, to put those resources into account? And And then pressure, again, pressure and stress, we didn't get into this, so I'll get into it in just a little bit. Pressure and stress are different. Pressure is about a focus on the consequences themselves. If I screw this up, then. Whatever follows the then. When our attention is on that, that's where we experience pressure. Or a sense of have to. So I have to do this. I must do this, which is not even different from the consequences, because if you follow up with, okay, but why do you have to do it? Well, because if I don't, then... And now we got all the consequences again. So pressure comes when we focus on consequences, the imagined outcomes of things. Stress comes from the situation itself. Do we perceive it as a threat? Do we believe we have the resources necessary to deal with it? So there's a distinction between the two. So with pressure, what I tell people is, number one, be a little bit humble in the sense that you don't know for sure that the consequences that you're imagining are actually going to happen the way that you think that they're gonna. Sometimes we're wrong. Often our crystal balls don't work the way we think they're gonna. So we have to acknowledge that. Number two is take on some wisdom and recognize that let's say you can predict the future and you know exactly what the consequences of success or failure are going to be. Well, you don't know if those consequences are ultimately going to be good or bad. What we label as good today, sometimes we label as bad tomorrow. I don't know. I mean, when I'm eating a piece of cheesecake, that's a good thing. And then, ask me, I don't know, an hour later, is it a good thing or bad thing? My answer is going to change. It's bad. So the same thing, a divorce is an example that I use. When I got divorced, if you were to ask me, is this a good thing or bad thing? I would say it was the worst thing I'd been through in a long time. Now, if you were to ask me, it's been close to 10 years, I'd say it was probably the best thing that's happened to me. It opened a lot of doors that weren't open at the time. So have that wisdom to recognize that good, bad, whether the consequences are going to be good, we don't know. There's no way to know ultimately down the road. And then the third thing is, let's say we do know. Let's say we can predict the future and we know that if we screw it up, for sure, everything's going to be bad. There's no way it's going to be otherwise. Well, it doesn't change what we need to do right now to create conditions for the success we want. And that is keep your attention on the task relevant things in this moment. Do what you can do, control what you can control to create conditions that will maximize the likelihood of the outcome you want. And so that's what I tell people with pressure. And some of that too, the fourth thing is just involving motivation. Be clear on why you're doing what you're doing. If it's to please a parent, if it's to get some number, if it's to avoid some kind of unpleasant whatever, those are tough motivations, and it will be challenging to keep your attention where it needs to be in that moment. But if you can tie the behavior, the taking of this exam, to something that is personal to you, that's meaningful to you, that really matters on an individual value-based level, well, now when those struggles come up, you'll be much more likely to be able to take that breath, to refocus, and to re-engage without getting stressed out or freaked out or whatever may tend to happen to you. Really being clear on what the motivation for doing it is and trying to connect it to ourselves, our inner selves, as much as we can. So, and it's long-winded advice, but that's the advice I got.
No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you. Wonderful, Brian. I think we need to let you go. So thank you so much for today. It's been fascinating to talk, and thank you once again. I'm just thinking in your head, just as what you were talking just now. If we'd had your younger self thinking of dropping out of college on the call today, I wonder if things might have worked out differently. Particularly the bit about motivation and finding your why, perhaps.
But the thing is, I did drop out, and then 4 or 5 years later, I went back and I finished my bachelor's degree, and I finished my master's degree, and I finished my PhD, but it was all in the time that I wanted to do it. It was, again, that motivation was for me. If I'd stuck with college the first time around, the motivation would have been, I don't know, because I don't want to look stupid, or I don't want my parents to think worse of me, or whatever it is, but it wouldn't be the motivation coming from me. And that would have made it very hard for me to do what I needed to do in order to pass college. But when I re-engaged, it was for myself. The motivation was coming from within. And I think that's why it's so important to keep that in mind. And it's not that hard to really identify what those things are that we care about and connect them to the behaviors we're engaged in. it can take some work, but once you get in the habit of doing it, it becomes easier. So, yeah, I mean, it's for me, it was a timing thing. I'm very happy that I dropped out of college, that I quit. And that's why I tell people, yeah, quitting's okay. Quit. When the time's right to quit, quit. And, when the time's not right to quit, stick with it and persevere and work through stuff. Only person who knows whether it's right to give up on this particular goal and shift to a different goal is us. And it's okay to do that. And it doesn't mean that you can't come back to the first goal. It happens to people all the time. Like they'll, you know what? I want to get a new degree. I've got my bachelor's degree, but I want to get a master's degree now. So they enroll in the school and they go for, 6 months to a year, but then an opportunity comes up at work and they can get a promotion, but the promotion comes with some extra responsibilities and now they don't have the time to put toward that other degree. Well, they've committed to the other degree. So is it okay to say no to it, to move to this other thing? Some people have a lot of guilt around that. They think that because they said they were going to do this a year ago, that they have to continue doing it, even though conditions have changed. But conditions have changed, and it's okay to acknowledge that and move in a different direction. So
I think that's great insight. I think that's really great advice, Brian. Thank you so much once again. If we're interested to find out more, as I'm sure many listeners are, about your work in this area generally, tell us where we might want to go next.
Yeah, you could start at brianhiteglobal.com, BrianHite global.com. That's my website. And you can just email me too. If you do, I promise you I will get back to you. The email is Brian, Brian, at brianhiteglobal.com. Shoot me an email. And because here's the thing, if you do struggle with stress or pressure, anxiety, burnout, these are things that are hard to push through. And when the stakes are high, it really matters that we're at our best. And when we're feeling that stress, pressure, and burnout, we are not at our best. So I've been there. I understand how hard it is. Please reach out, ask whatever questions you have. And if I can help you or direct you in some other, to some other place that might be beneficial for you, I'm absolutely willing to do that. It is a hard place. People struggle with it all the time. And I'm here to help you not. So please reach out and ask whatever you have.
Well, thank you so much once again. It's been an absolute blast. Thank you once again, Dr. Brian Hite.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Well, thanks again, Brian. And if you enjoyed today's episode half as much as I did, I thought it was fantastic, please do take a moment to drop us a 5-star rating. And if you can, a little review, sharing what you like about the show and how we've been able to help you. It's always hugely appreciated and super helpful in helping us to reach and help new listeners, which is something we're always looking to do. And if you're heading into exam season yourself, why not treat yourself to a copy of Outsmart Your Exams? Our handy little guide to the top tips and tricks you want to be using in exam week and in the exam hall itself to give you that all-important edge, make sure you're scoring all the marks you deserve. I've been looking at the numbers. We recently passed over 3,000 copies of the book sold to date, which, according to industry sources, is kind of about typical sales for a traditionally published book that was through an actual publisher. And so for a self-published book, I'm really proud that it's gone on to reach and help so many people over the years. With one reviewer on Amazon saying it took their brother up 4 grades. I don't necessarily promise that big a margin of difference to everybody. The feedback I normally get from teaching these strategies to my coaching clients over the years, though, is that it does all add up to a very noteworthy margin of maybe in the region of 5 to 10 percentage points extra in a given exam, which could easily be what you need to take you over a crucial grade boundary and get the result you're really looking for. So do check out Outsmart Your Exams via the link in the episode description and grab your copy today. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, it's been a joy to have your company and wishing you every success, as always, in your exam.